Good morning and welcome. I'm Harvey Fineberg, President at the Gordon and Betty Moore Foundation and former Dean of the Harvard T.H. Chan School of Public Health. It is such a thrill. It is a real thrill for me to be here with all of you today, and I look forward with great anticipation to the venture we are about to embark upon. Welcome to the inaugural Symposium of the Thich Nhat Hanh Center for Mindfulness and Public Health, based at the Harvard T.H. Chan School of Public Health. I'm here in part because I love the fact this is now actually happening. And I love being part of the enterprise along with my dear colleague Lilian Cheung, co-chairing the advisory committee. And Walter, it's a special pleasure to be here with you, Michelle, all of our colleagues from the school, from the larger Harvard community, from the world community, our monastic colleagues, our dear experts today. Welcome all, and thank you for being here. The center officially launched in 2022 when Harvard, on behalf of the T.H. Chan School of Public Health, accepted the gift that enabled the center to begin its work. And its work goes forward from today along three main lines of focus. First, the center is intended to empower people around the globe to live with purpose, equanimity, and joy through the practice of mindfulness. Second, the center will pursue evidence and approaches to improving health and well-being through mindfulness, and it will do this through rigorous scientific study. And the center is intended, finally, to educate the larger Harvard community and many others around the globe about the practice and benefits of mindfulness. I feel myself a perpetual student, and I can assure you, whatever your own experience and knowledge and understanding of mindfulness, that no one in this room has more to learn than I do through the course of this day and beyond. And I will join you as our most eager student through the day and beyond. We have, I think, a wonderful program that we will experience together. We want this to be a relaxed and supportive environment for all. If you're comfortable with a mask, without a mask, in whatever way brings you a serenity to participate, we welcome it. We're going to be able to explore together the potential of mindfulness to promote public health. As we begin today, please just take a moment, if you have not already, to silence your telephone. We are going to be photographing and recording throughout the program. If you have any concern about that, please let the staff know, and we will try our best to accommodate. We have built into the program ample time for breaks, for lunch, and for mindful walking later today. It's now my privilege to welcome Sister Thich Nghiem, who joins us from the Magnolia Grove Monastery, a residential monastery and a mindfulness practice meditation center in the tradition of Plum Village, which was founded by Zen master Thich Nhat Hanh. Sister will invite the bell and introduce the audience today, all of us, to mindful breathing, which is a critical foundation for Thich Nhat Hanh's practice of mindful being.
We would like to start off today's symposium by listening to the bell of mindfulness. We will be doing a lot of listening today to very distinguished speakers and experts, and to make sure that we are not just listening outwardly, we would like to invite you to also listen inwardly. So please join us in this practice of listening to the bell. Bells of mindfulness come in many forms. This is one of them. We also can recognize bells of mindfulness every time a text message comes through, every time the telephone pings, every red traffic light, if you're lucky, whenever a church bell chimes. So throughout our daily life, we have many opportunities to come home to ourselves. I paid them. That was perfect timing. Come home to ourselves and check in what's happening on the inside. It's a chance to reset the counter to zero, because throughout our busy day, stress can accumulate. And we know, as experts in the field of mindfulness or as interested practitioners, we know we can't be happy and peaceful when we're stressed, when our mind is running. So let's just take a moment to find a comfortable position where we can allow the passage of air to be free as it moves in and out of the body. If you'd like to, you can close your eyes or keep them half open and unfocused. This is a moment of deep listening to ourselves. Starting to be aware of the way the air moves in and out of the body. Does anything move as the air moves in and out? You might feel some movement in your chest or your abdomen as it rises and falls gently. We don't need to change our breathing, just observe it. And we can become aware of the contact of our body and the chair we're sitting on. The contact of our back against the back of the seat, our legs on the seat, our arms resting on the armrest or our lap, our feet in contact with the ground. A half smile on our face helps us relax the body, relax the face, gives rise to a feeling of joy and peace, contentment. As we listen to this wonderful sound of the bell, we bring our mind back to our body. We take note of what's happening in the body and in our mind. Is there any constriction that we can release? Becoming more spacious. I relax my forehead. I relax my jaw, my throat, my shoulders, my chest, the area around my heart. Is my heart beating fast or slowly? I send love and compassion to my heart. I give it space. I'm aware of my feelings. Is there anxiety, stress, excitement, peace, or calm? I let go of all worrying and all thinking. I send myself love and compassion to every cell of my body. Thank you, everybody, for joining us in that short meditation.
On behalf of all of us, thank you, Sister Nghiem, for bringing us together in this very moving and special way. It's now my pleasure to welcome our Dean, Michelle Williams, an internationally renowned epidemiologist and public health scientist, a widely celebrated academic leader, and a moving force to establish the Thich Nhat Hanh Center at the T.H. Chan School. Michelle, it's a pleasure to welcome you to the podium. Michelle Williams.
Good morning, everyone. Before I start my remarks, I want to say many of you have heard me refer to Harvey as the Dean of Deans and my Dean, and I couldn't thank you more for that kind introduction. He's really the Dean of Deans. Good morning, and I want to thank you all for joining us today, and especially to thank our monastic participants for leading us in that mindful exercise. Thanks so much. You know, before I give big speeches, and you wouldn't believe this, but I am really an introvert, so it requires me to be mindful about my native, myself. And so before I give these big speeches like this, I always take a few minutes to do deep breathing, to center myself, and to be able to honor the attention that people will pay me, because it's important to respect that attention and the time. But this is the first time in my career that I've ever had the benefit of being guided through the process by experts. So thanks again for that. And, you know, I want to say it's a great way to be in the right headspace to have the privilege of so many people's attention and time. So, you know, if I may, I might ask, you know, if you could start traveling with me. You know, my next big speech is in Singapore, and I hear it's lovely. So, you know, we should talk. Before I go any further, I'd like to acknowledge that Harvard University is located on the traditional and ancestral land of the Massachusetts, the original inhabitants of what is now known as Boston and Cambridge. As we pay respects to the people of the Massachusetts tribe, past and present, and as we honor the land itself, which remains sacred to the Massachusetts people, I hope that we will reflect on the gift that we are occupying this space. As we strive to remain in the present, in the now, it is also essential that we recognize the circumstances that have led us here today. Now, I'd like to say it's an honor and a privilege to truly welcome you all to the Harvard T.H. Chan School of Public Health. I'm grateful to be here in this moment, surrounded by partners and friends as we launch the Thich Nhat Hanh Center for Mindfulness in Public Health. The timing of this new center feels just right. It feels just right because it seems that mindfulness is ever more important now than before, because also increasingly we are finding ourselves distracted, as we heard this morning. We live in an era defined by distraction. Our attention has been commodified by companies attempting to monetize our focus, and we have never been more accessible to our workplaces and to our acquaintances and friends. But we cannot blame others for our own lack of concentration. The smartphone in our pockets, we know they are powerful tools, but we have the option to leave them in our pockets or to turn them off if we ever remember where the off button is. We all too often, we choose to take out that cell phone. And we embrace, sadly, that distraction. But we can choose to be present in the moment. that choice does have its costs if we are not making the choice of being present. That choice of not being present has its cost, and is essential that we gain a better understanding of those costs. We must better grasp the consequences of our decisions to either prioritize or ignore mindfulness. Mindfulness takes public health. Mindfulness, like public health, addresses a wide range of human experiences. Mindfulness calls upon us, each and every one of us, to be aware of our present existence down to the smallest detail. Mindfulness calls on us to think about how we eat, how we walk, and how we breathe. These are some of the building blocks of our lives, which are all too easy to overlook. By overlooking them, we pay the price. There is evidence of a correlation between mindful living, mindful life, and healthy life. Studies have found that mindfulness can reduce chronic pain in patients who cannot find relief from traditional medical care. There is also evidence that mindfulness can help lower the risk of heart attack or stroke in Black adults with coronary artery disease, and that mindfulness can slow or even halt weight gain among women with obesity. We have also seen data that shows that mindfulness can support healthier sleep patterns for children and ward off cognitive decline for older adults. The state of the research into the relationship between mindfulness and health is still quite nascent. I would say still quite young. But these examples tell us that mindfulness may indeed impact more than our emotional state. You know, it turns out that the proverbial chicken soup for the soul may actually also help heal our bodies. That would be a real game changer. It would be a real game changer because if mindfulness can improve physical health, the potential is massive. Public health researchers, and there are many in this room, have devoted our lives to finding opportunities to support population health. But all too often, we find that the miracles of the science that we try to bring forward to improve population health are constrained by costs or by logistical challenges. Neither of those limitations apply to mindfulness. The practice requires no specific tools or products. It is available to everyone, everywhere. No matter your age, your race, your gender or background, or even financial status, you have the ability to lead a mindful life and potentially improve your health in the process. Now, there's still more research that has to be done to determine the exact relationship and the mechanisms between health and mindfulness. But today we are here launching a center that's a hub of scholarship, of research and teaching, and practice, putting all of those together so that we can further explore the connections between mindfulness, health, both physical and mental, across the life course. Already, the center has begun exploring the potential connection between mindfulness and healthy longevity, in which people live not only longer lives, but lead healthier and more functional lives. And I would say healthier, more functional, and joyful lives. The center is also prepared to lead on mindfulness eating and the importance of exercise, including in childhood. The simple act of teaching a child to be aware of what goes into their body can set up a lifetime of healthy habits, creating significant benefits for the individual that cascades to the society in which the individual lives, and across the planet. I'm thrilled by the possibilities created by this new initiative, which will bring the Harvard Chan Schools of Public Health rigorous scientific approach to bear on this nascent, this young field. The Harvard community will also benefit because it will benefit as being a living laboratory for this work. The fit of this laboratory is perfect because the center's focus aligns perfectly with Harvard Chan's mission to build a world where every human being can thrive. The proclamation, and I hope we can show the slide, the proclamation that President Vago presented to the donors who funded this center hits home today. And I'm delighted that we have a graph that includes the quote, which I will read. President Vago said, "We commemorate the establishment of the Thich Nhat Hanh Center for Mindfulness in Public Health to promote interdisciplinary research on the practice of mindfulness at Harvard. This extraordinary generosity of the donor positions Harvard T.H. Chan School of Public Health and the university at the forefront of efforts to advance the science of mindfulness by providing enduring leadership and research support," end quote. That's it right there. The Thich Nhat Hanh Center will put the Harvard Chan School at the forefront of this valuable and laudable work. That's an accomplishment very much worth celebrating. And it's only fitting that the center bears the name of Thich Nhat Hanh because the idea for Harvard to create such a center originated with him. You see, the seed for the center was planted in 2013 when Thich visited Boston and suggested the concept to Harvard Chan faculty members Walter Willett and Lilian Cheung. Today, that vision is realized with both Walter and Lilian, with both of them being key leaders in this effort. The center is a testament to Thech's impact on so many, and it is a sign of how his legacy continues to remind us all of the benefits of being present in the now. As we prepare for a day of thoughtful reflection and conscious presence, it's only right for me to close my remarks with one of Thech's teaching. "The present moment is filled with joy and happiness," he said. "If you are attentive, you will see it." As I stand here before all of you today, I see the joy. I have had the privilege of experiencing the joy of helping to promote and develop this idea that has developed into a center and that has developed in this amazingly wonderful convening. I see happiness, I feel happiness. I feel the compassion and the willingness to take that moment and to be mindful in how we live, how we work, how we breathe, and how we engage with each other. I see the opportunity before us for us to marry the two valuable things that are long-held practices for our communities. To use the Harvard Chan School's expertise to better understand the impact of mindfulness. That's one. And the second is to use mindfulness to further Harvard Chan's mission. And if we do so, we continue to pay down on the privilege of our having an association with this extraordinary school of public health in an extraordinary ecosystem of Harvard University, and to have individuals like yourselves who commit to sharing your knowledge, your practice with each other, all in support of creating a world where everybody, no matter where they're born or their financial or physical circumstances, have an opportunity to reach their potential. So I'm personally grateful. I'm grateful to be here with all of you, and I look forward to learning from all of what you have to teach. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Michelle, for those inspiring words and for the inspiration that you have provided over these many years and months of hard work to bring the center to its current position. Thank you. It's now my great pleasure to welcome a key driving force behind the center to offer a few words, Dr. Lilian Cheung. Lilian I can see Lilian needs little introduction to this audience, but allow me to observe that no one, pound for pound, packs a bigger wallop for nutrition and for public health than does our dear colleague, Dr. Cheung. She has been a leader in nutrition at the Harvard School of Public Health and around the world. Dr. Cheung also co-authored the book Savor with Thich Nhat Hanh, originally published in 2010 and now available in 17 languages. Well worth our time. A book about savor that is itself worthy of savor. And now we have a chance to savor the author and her kind words, Dr. Lilian Cheung.
Thank you, Michelle, and welcome everyone. My deepest gratitude to Dean Williams, Dr. Harvey Fineberg, my mentor, Dr. Frank Hu, Dr. Walter Willett, Sister Cheung Kong, Faban, Taipa An, where is he? And all the monastics to enable the birth of the Thich Nhat Hanh Center for Mindfulness in Public Health. Dear friends, I'm so thrilled to be here with you for the inauguration of the Thich Nhat Hanh Center. And Dean Williams gave us a wonderful overview of the scientific goals, and you will soon hear more about the latest research in mindfulness from scientific experts around the world. I'd like to focus my remarks on a more personal reflection of Thich Nhat Hanh, the beloved teacher we call Thai. I'm sure most of you are familiar with the arc of his life. Born in 1926, he joined a Buddhist monastery as a teenager and began a journey to explore the path to enlightenment. Throughout his life, Thai found remarkable ways to combine his practice of mindfulness and meditation with extraordinary actions for peace and social justice. In fact, in recognition of his powerful advocacy for peace during the Vietnam War, Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. nominated Thai for Nobel Peace Prize, calling him an apostle of peace and nonviolence. Thai invested his life energy in training the next generation of engaged Buddhists and in building communities globally dedicated to mindful living and spiritual growth. We are so pleased to have monastics from several of those communities here with us today. I was fortunate enough to first learn from Thai in a 1997 retreat in Key West, Florida, entitled Opening the Door to Healing and Transformation. I really needed transformation as I was totally stressed out, juggling my academic career with 3 young sons. What's the true miracle was that I experienced 3 days without stress. Towards the end of the retreat, Thai said, "Some of you may have experienced some peace during this retreat. However, if you don't continue to practice when you return home, you are going to lose it all." From that point onward, I was determined to continue practicing some mindfulness daily. During a 1999 retreat in Plum Village, France, Sister Cheung asked me to join the walking meditation to Thai's hut. As we approached, Thai was sitting on a platform facing the plum trees. He kept waving at me and then asked me to sit down next to him. He said, "Where are you from? What do you do?" That began the journey of us getting acquainted. Eating mindfully was a core practice of Thai's teachings. However, as a dietitian trained in public health nutrition, I could not get over the fact that my education never addressed mindful eating. I was compelled to write a book about mindfulness that would address both eating for our health and the health of our planet. So in 2009, I put together a book outline for Savor Mindful Eating, Mindful Life, and I presented to Thai. I was so surprised and shocked when he decided he would like to co-author the book with me. Over his lifetime, he has authored over, exactly 199 books. And there are only 2 books that were co-authored with academic, and I am one of them. This is really a true honor for me. Among the many remarkable aspects of Thai's life was his openness to teaching anyone, anywhere. He could have remained in his monastery, but that was not the way. Thai's books, videos, speeches were an attempt to engage with the entire world, to meet people where they were and to bring them an understanding of the principles of peace, interbeing, and oneness. He spoke to members of Congress, presidents, ministers of states, editors of newspaper. He even had a personal meeting with Defense Secretary Robert Moderator to urge peace in Vietnam. He led a day of mindfulness for 300 financiers at the World Bank. He shared his wisdom with diplomats and staff at the UN. He spoke to the gatherings of people of all faith and to people with no faith. He even came to California to lead a workshop for employees in Google. I would like to share a video clip from that remarkable day in 2011.
When we want to make the other person happy, we want to give him or her something. We might cook something good and give to him or to her. But the most precious thing you can give him or her is not something you can buy from the market. It's your true presence. We have so much worries and fear and anger. We are not happy. And that is why the practice is to bring more space into our heart and around us. A person cannot be a happy person unless she has some freedom, some space in herself or around her. So to love means to offer space. And if you do not have space in you, how can you offer your beloved one with space? Or you might like to practice walking meditation, mindful walking. While breathing in, you make one step. And you become aware of the step you make. You are touching life in the present moment with your foot. The first few minutes, you can see the outcome right away. Breathing in, if you pay attention only to your in-breath, and then you can release and the past and the future and all your projects. And you don't have to go to a temple in order to practice mindfulness. Walking from the parking lot to your office, you might enjoy mindful walking. You might enjoy every step.
I share these memories of Thai because they are an inspiration for us here at the Thich Nhat Hanh Center for Mindfulness in Public Health. We will rigorously study the science of mindfulness, as you will hear throughout today. But we will also seek to share the benefits of mindfulness with all people around the world, just like Thai did. We will show them how to incorporate the principles of mindfulness in their own lives to improve their health and the health of the world around them. Finally, I would like to share with you what we wrote in Savor. None of us lives forever. While we are alive, all of us have the choice to live a life of mindfulness, leading to more peace and joy, or to a life without mindfulness, leading to more anxiety and suffering. Every day, it is important to remind ourselves that all notions, things, and people are impermanent, that sickness and loss are inevitable, and that we need to live in the moment to be truly fulfilled. I'm so proud that we are opening this center named for Thai, our great teacher. I can't wait to get started for the work ahead. Now let me welcome back Dr. Harvey Fineberg, who did not mention one other post that he did. He was the president of the National Academy of Medicine as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Lilian, for that marvelous introduction to Thai's life and teaching. I think you may not realize yourself what an inspiration your own life and work has been and is to all of us. So thank you, Lilian. We're now going to have an opportunity to hear from two panels of discussants, experts who have come to share their ideas, their experiences, their suggestions with us from near and far, from Australia, from the United Kingdom, from Germany, France, California, New Hampshire, and of course here in Boston as well. There are full bios available for any who are interested through the QR code in your program. Our speakers today will be introduced only very briefly by the moderators. Session 1 will be moderated by Dr. Walter Willett, Dr. Willett is a professor of epidemiology and nutrition at the Harvard Chan School, and he is the director of the Thich Nhat Hanh Center for Mindfulness in Public Health. Our second session will be moderated by Dr. Frank Hu, chair of the Department of Nutrition and the Frederick J. Stair Professor of Nutrition and Epidemiology at the Harvard T.H. Chan School of Public Health, also Professor of Medicine at Harvard Medical School and the Brigham and Women's Hospital. As we prepare to welcome the next session, let us take a moment to breathe and to be with ourselves and one another, and to invite the bell.
Dear friends, you may like to close your eyes, feel your feet on the earth, relax your shoulders, smile. Breathing in, I know I am breathing in. Breathing out, I know I am breathing out. Breathing in, I am aware of this present moment. Breathing out, I know this is a wonderful moment.
What a pleasant way to start a session. Thank you, Brother Minh An. It's a great honor for me to be able to help launch this important, unique center named after Thich Nhat Hanh. In 1968, when I was a medical student in Ann Arbor, we were in the middle of a raging war in Vietnam and sending tens of thousands of soldiers there and wondering what's going on. We heard there was a young monk named Thich Nhat Hanh who was traveling about the U.S. trying to help people here understand the origins and what we might do about that war. So we invited him to spend a few days with us in Ann Arbor, and that was truly an amazing experience. We learned a lot about the history of Vietnam, and we also learned that sending a lot of American soldiers there was not helping the situation at all. That had a major effect on our plans for working on peace and anti-war, and motivated quite a bit of the activities in Ann Arbor at that time. It was, again, 10 years ago that we had a chance to have our lives come together, thanks to Lilian, actually, to bring us together. And that, as you heard already, was the origins of thinking about having this center that we're celebrating today. As Harvey said, one of our main goals for this day is for us in our community to learn more about what is going on in the world of mindfulness in research and practice, and therefore we invited many of the world's leaders in research and practice on mindfulness to join us today. And we are their students, and like Harvey said, we're all looking forward to learning much today. As you've seen from the program, we've packed a lot in one day, partly realizing that it's hard for many people to take more than a day off in their full lives already. And so we won't introduce each speaker individually. As Harvey said, we could talk several hours about the people you have sitting right in front of you and their many accomplishments. So what we're going to do is start right off, and we'll just go from one speaker to another. But it is my great pleasure to introduce in name John Kabat-Zinn, who is certainly for many years been a world leader in mindfulness. John.
It's hard for me to articulate how I feel at this particular moment, because the approximation would be died and gone to heaven. I have that experience a lot, I must tell you, and it's extremely gratifying and actually uplifting, because I really do feel like humanity is facing a moment that is absolutely critical, and we need all hands on deck on Spaceship Earth, if you will, at this particular moment in time. And we need to recruit every single human capacity that is known to us human beings, even if it's not fully known, so that we can actually mobilize our inner as well as our outer resources for facing the enormity of the challenges that the human mind, when it doesn't know itself deeply enough, has actually produced in the world, both in the form of the warming of the planet at a terrifying rate that is going to have remarkable consequences for public health and everything else across the world. To say nothing of a kind of mindfulness, a kind of awareness that the dominant white majority of people in this country, at least, are recognizing that has been only true for people of color for 400 years, but that white people now on a whole other level are waking up to and becoming more mindful of the fact that there is intrinsic, implicit, institutional structural racism that's built into an enormous number of our institutions and ways of living, and we don't even know it. We're like clueless, as the younger people would say. Okay? And so mindfulness is really, it's a sort of, Thich Nhat Hanh, I think it was in 1976, he wrote a book called The Miracle of Mindfulness. Now, you know, it's pretty heavy duty to use the word miracle associated with anything. I mean, that's a major claim. And I think he was right on. I mean, he was absolutely right on. But it has taken 50 years to actually recognize the depth and the breadth of what mindfulness, the word, actually has to offer and what it's carrying. And the interesting thing about it is that in my working sort of definition of mindfulness, it really is pure awareness, okay? So it's not something you have to acquire. It's something every single one of us constitutively is born with. But what the practice of mindfulness, the cultivation of mindfulness, has to do with accessing that awareness. He called it a miracle. I have such great admiration for Greta Thunberg. And she is, as you well know, on the autism spectrum, and she refers to her autism as a superpower. And I really feel like the word miracle and the word superpower both need to be, in some sense, recognized as the kind of core of what is being offered by this new Thich Nhat Hanh Center for Mindfulness here, and by, we have representatives from the Center for Mindfulness at Brown University and the Center for Mindfulness at Oxford University, with an endowed chair in perpetuity, as they do in Oxford, one of the oldest universities, if not the oldest on the planet, an endowed chair in mindfulness in perpetuity. So from the perspective of 1979, when I started the stress reduction clinic at the university down the turnpike at UMass Medical Center, from the perspective of 1979, what is unfolding here is beyond imagination. And if you had claimed that that would happen in 1979 and written a grant for the NIH saying so as much, which I did, they would have thought you were an absolute lunatic and probably ready for an institutionalization. And look at what's unfolded in a mere 43 years and counting. And before that, there were antecedents, Dharma antecedents that go way back. So the most important thing here is to understand this confluence of streams between Buddha Dharma in its most universal expression. So it's not about Buddhism. And I think most of my Buddhist friends and colleagues would agree that ultimately it is about humanity itself, and that everybody's included. And so the Dharma, the true Dharma, and I know the Dharma that Thai was teaching, was an absolutely universal invitation to what? To wake up, to wakefulness. And that might have sounded back in the 70s as kind of new age pie in the sky bullshit. But now with 30 or 40 years of neuroscience and psychological research and so forth, there's a suggestion at least that it's slightly less than bullshit. Okay? And it's just getting started. And without exaggerating the research findings or reifying them into some kind of religious event that we need to genuflect to, which we surely don't. We need to understand the confluence of these streams of science and public health and medicine and a deep questioning of what it means to be human on this planet at this moment in time. And this is a form of intelligence that is native to us that we can recruit simply by practicing not nothing, but what looks a lot like nothing from the outside. And I refer to it as non-doing. And just to throw it out there so that it's, at least there's a footnote to it today, is that it is a non-dual practice. It is not about improving yourself or getting somewhere else, but about the snowball's chance in hell of potentially being where you already are and as you already are and who you already are, and to inhabit the space of that awareness in an embodied way that doesn't make an I, me, and a mine, and that actually recognizes the profundity of our interconnectedness. And so, when I started MBSR in 1979, I'm not a psychologist. I had no training in any of that kind of stuff. I just had my Zen meditation practice. And somehow, because I had a PhD from across the river at MIT with a Nobel laureate in molecular biology, they figured, well, he must know what he's doing, so we'll let him do it, and they just set up a clinic to teach mindfulness. And it was never meant to be a therapy or just a kind of, a clinic where we fix people, because it's not about fixing. It's about healing, which in my working definition is coming to terms with things as they are, the actuality of things. Okay? And that all educational institutions, it's an arc of learning, growing, healing, and transformation. And it's a lifetime's engagement to not get anywhere. Seriously. Because if you're trying to get somewhere else, you're actually impeding your own deep, what some people will call Buddha nature, or your truest brilliance, your genius, that superpower that Greta Thunberg's pointing to, that actually is right here in the human heart all the time. And when we get really depressed and anxious and upset, it's because we forget. And so the process of mindfulness is actually the cultivation of remembering. And in an embodied way, and when you drop in on the present moment, and it doesn't have to be silent. It can be in a conversation. It can be in a talk or anything. Like you are recruiting what I call an orthogonal dimension of reality. Everything's already the same as it always was. except everything's different because you've woken up, you've dropped in, and with no agenda. That's the beautiful part of it, is that, yes, the agenda, of course, is to minimize suffering and maximize benefit for all beings, and the planet. So if I knew of another superpower that was more powerful than mindfulness in the way we're describing it today, I would not be doing what I'm doing, but I haven't found one yet. And so I feel like I just want to express my gratitude and my deepest hope for this Thich Nhat Hanh Center for Mindfulness here at the Harvard Cheung School of Public Health, to recognize this is not a therapy. This is the bell curve of humanity, which is what public health is all about, in the direction of greater sanity, well-being, love, and wakefulness. That is and the stakes are enormously high. Now, the Surgeon General, in 1979, put out a report called Healthy People, which inspired me to just go for it and set up the MBS Heart Clinic at UMass. I used that as support. Now the Surgeon General, Vivek Murthy, he's guiding mindfulness meditations publicly himself and putting them out on the web, on Calm and other, platforms. So we're living in a new universe, and it's just the right moment for this, because now this is not merely about individual health or even public health in the way we've usually be thinking of it. We have to think of this as planetary health, health for the entire ecosystem of the planet Earth and the thin atmosphere and everything else. And so as we breathe in that thin atmosphere, let's actually take care of what most needs taking care of. And I'm really honored to have been asked to participate in this inaugural celebration of what's to come. Thank you.
Wow, inspired. Hope everybody feels inspired. I certainly do. My name is David Vago. If we can maybe put my slides up, the first slide would be great. And then I'll start to progress. It's really a humbling experience to be here before you all today, to just see the commitment from Harvard to mindfulness is really, I think, transformative in itself. It's really unbelievable. So thank you, Lilian. Thank you, Walter. Thank you, Jim Williams. Thank you, Harvard, for making this happen. So I as much as as time has passed since Thay's 1976 Miracle of Mindfulness, we now have to figure out how to measure that miracle and show that indeed maybe it's unmeasurable, some of these effects of mindfulness, but for public health we have to start somewhere. So I was going to start today by talking about the what, the who, the where, and maybe even the why and the how we contextualize, so we can put a framework behind the study of mindfulness. So just to walk you through what I will try to do for you in the next 10, 12 minutes, we're going to talk about what are the core mindfulness practices that we focus on, that we study, that now have evidence behind it to support their use in clinical interventions. And we're going to talk about how do these practices actually function? How do they actually improve outcomes related to health and well-being? What is the evidence? Do we have any evidence? So I will briefly mention some of the evidence that we have out there from some of the meta-analyses that have been done. And then I'll talk a little bit about what we need to do to mobilize and really converge across the different silos that we have who are studying these practices specifically. Okay, so the why. Clearly, we are living in a time of many existential threats. There are, not only are we under a climate crisis, but the potential for a nuclear holocaust. There are a lot of polarization across the world. People are still suffering tremendously. And this comes out in an area, a domain of public health, namely mental health. So we are truly a stressed out, anxious, and depressed world. You can see that even in 2019, 1 in 8 people, almost 1 billion people on this planet, live with a mental health condition. And the majority of those conditions are anxiety and depression. Almost 1 billion people. And in 2020, as a result of the pandemic over the last few years, those cases of mental disorders have risen sharply, with 26% and 28% increase respectively for anxiety and major depressive disorder. That is incredible, on top of 1 billion people. So that's about 1 out of every 5 people who are living with a major mental illness. And that's even worse for adolescents. So when we think about mental illness, one of the ways that we can conceptualize it is on a spectrum rather than in a box. Because this is one way we can move the needle. And if we think about flourishing or mental well-being, or mental wellness, really on the opposite side of the spectrum, we can start to think about moving the needle a little bit more from one side to the other. And if you've ever experienced this other sort of blasé feeling of languishing, where you're just feeling meh, it's somewhere in the middle. And that's where a lot of people have been feeling. It's not quite mental illness, but it's not quite flourishing. It's kind of somewhere in the middle where you're not sure exactly where you are on the mental health spectrum. But in either case, the whole idea is to move a sliding scale from some aspect of where you are, wherever you may be, whether it's completely impacting your ability to function on a daily level, or it's just, in a place of, I'm fine. This is a word that my 7-year-old uses all the time. I'm fine. How was school today? It was fine. It's really more like languishing, because when you're not expressing how you're feeling, except for the level of fine, it's not so fine. So can we use meditation to move that needle? And that's really the question that we're posing. How do we use meditation and mindfulness to really move across this sliding scale from mental illness to languishing and into full-scale flourishing? So this brings me to the what. The what are the actual core mindfulness practices. So let me just briefly talk about what these practices are, and this is the practices that now have evidence behind them to support that they are helping people move that needle. So focused attention practice is typically moving your attention on a single pointed object, like the breath or somewhere on the body. It could be an image. Then there's an open awareness type of practice, which is more receptive. It's more diffuse attention, sometimes referred to as open awareness. And sometimes it's just a way of practicing mindfulness, being mindful of anything that arises and passes. There are movement-based practices like walking meditation, like we're going to practice today, or some techniques like yoga or Tai Chi or Qigong. The other 3 practices include informal practices, so mindfulness in everyday life. So it doesn't just end on the cushion, right? It also has to be continued on into the rest of your daily living, when you are doing the dishes or you're eating. Ethical enhancement practices, sometimes referred to as constructive or heart-opening practices that cultivate love and kindness for others. And breathwork practices are now having a very trendy kind of role these days as being even more impactful than maybe even sitting on a cushion. So this includes pranayama practices, or if you're familiar with Wim Hof, some of the cyclic hyperventilation practices and cold immersion therapies that you see. So breathwork is certainly part of the core practices. And that when we prescribe an intervention, the one that John has been advocating since 1979, the mindfulness-based intervention really comes with a prescription. And that prescription, which is now an evidence-based model, is 18 to 26 hours of training, 8 weekly group classes, including 1 6-hour class, informal and formal practices at home, dyads or triads of inquiry and whole group reflection. And then if you include at least 4 of those core practices together, you have a mindfulness-based intervention. Now, these have been modified and have been studied. The modifications have been studied over time, but this is the first generation mindfulness-based intervention. Okay, so how do they work? Now, we've identified, actually, over 10 years ago, when I was an instructor here at Harvard Medical School, working in the psychiatry department at Brigham and Women's Hospital with David Silberzweig, we developed a model that focused on trying to identify what the mechanisms are. How does mindfulness work? Well, given how difficult it is to operationalize mindfulness, we came up with a framework of self-transformation. How is the self transformed? First, by increasing our ability to be aware of ourselves and our mental habits, by ability to have control or regulation of our responses and impulses, and to develop a positive relationship between self and other that transcends our self-focused needs and increases pro-social behavior and this non-duality of experience. And now we've added, in a more recent publication, this idea of self-integration, which is the incorporation of holistic characteristics into a unified experience of self. So together, these processes of self-transformation leads to very explicit mechanisms that we can study and that some of us will be talking about or alluding to today through things like meta-awareness or metacognition. And this includes how we embody cognition and how we can decenter or create psychological distance between our thoughts and ourselves. How we can regulate our attention and our emotion, how we develop equanimity to be able to recover and to enhance our resilience strategies, to stabilize our attention, to inhibit some of the impulses, to improve our mental habits by removing our biases and extinguishing those kinds of habits that are maladaptive. We're also describing empathy to improve our ability to have a theory of mind and to develop and cultivate compassion, to be motivated not just by our self-development or to optimize performance, but to actually have altruistic intentions. And to integrate is really to find purpose and meaning, to reappraise, to savor, to gain insight and wisdom. These are the mechanisms that we're all talking about and which we are testing. Although, as John alluded to, there is no way to change and optimize ourselves through mindfulness, but we do have to measure some of these side effects that develop through the development and cultivation of awareness. And these are the ones that we can foreseeably measure. One of the ways that these mechanisms manifest is in a model that was developed by Elissa Epel, actually, in how we can understand the effects of stress on the brain and the body. So if we are to flourish as human beings, we have to manage our stresses in a particular way. If we don't manage stress in an effective way, it leads to things like cancer or disabilities, cognitive disabilities, physical disabilities, diabetes, cardiovascular disease, and premature mortality. We now know that. We now know that our mismanagement of stress leads to this premature mortality. But there is another way to develop a different perspective on how we handle our stress. And this idea of how stress leads to premature mortality is referred to as inflammaging. It's a term that describes premature aging induced by chronic toxic stress and persistent underlying inflammation. So if we can see our stresses in a different way, in a positive perspective, as a challenge, or with courage, it actually has a positive effect on our brains and bodies. There's a positive impact of stress when we have that kind of perspective. And this leads to mental wellness and rejuvenescence. This comes from Elissa's model of stress acceleration versus stress rejuvenescence. So this is something that I just wanted to mention. One of the things that we've been studying at Vanderbilt, where I've been for the last 6 years, is I'm just going to briefly mention, we're looking at the lymphatic system, which is the metabolic clearinghouse of all of the waste products that comes out of our brains. And we're finding that that meditation, similarly to sleep, can improve how metabolic waste is removed from our brains. So this is something that I'm very excited about. I'm just going to mention that this is a physical effect on our bodies as a result of meditation. So I'm going to fast forward through the rest of my slides just to say a few things because I've run out of time. What I'm going to say is that there's evidence now from mindfulness-based interventions. And what they say is that I'm just going to point a picture at who we are. These people, some of them are in the audience today. We created a really impactful grant that looking at meta-analyses of all the impacts of mindfulness-based interventions on different outcomes. Outcomes related to emotion, cognition, and self-related processing. And at this point, what we can say is that unfortunately, or fortunately, what really depends on perspective, the impact of these practices on cognition does not move the needle when you compare them to an active control. When you compare them to a gold standard approach like cognitive behavioral therapy, they're non-inferior. So this may mean that mindfulness has a place, but they're not going to above and beyond do any better than maybe sitting in a room together talking about stress in a supportive way, or using traditional gold standard approaches like cognitive behavioral therapy. I'm going to do one other thing about, talk about apps, and I'm just going to say about apps that now this is the new delivery format for the Dharma. The Dharma is now delivering itself through apps. We have billions of users of people who have a smartphone and who are using apps to experience Buddha Dharma in some specific way. And this is where we are now trying to better understand how meditation can be delivered through apps. But the biggest problem, and I'm just going to show you that, of course, now we're at a point of Thich Nhat Hanh's book was in the 70s, and there's John, 1979, and we're in the mindful revolution, and now we're working with apps. This is how the Dharma is now delivered. So, and it may be appropriate. But what I wanted to say, and of course there are some benefits to, and this comes from a meta-analysis on apps, and there are some benefits in anxiety, stress, well-being. But one of the things that's a problem, and this will be my last slide, I promise. One of the problems is this is actually showing you the retention rates of people who download Calm or Headspace or one of the big apps. And it finds that after 30 days of just installing it on their phone, they're already done. They're already done. And this is a problem that we have to work with. Because if this is the new delivery system for mindfulness, then we have to be better at how we keep people engaged and keep them practicing. Because as we know, we have to keep our practice beyond the cushion. Okay, so I'm ending with who and the where. This is the people who are doing the practices. These are the centers that are out there. We want to bridge the silos, break down the silos, and start working together to really help humanity at this inflection point for the species. So I just make a plug for the new International Society for Contemplative Research, which is really trying to break down those silos and bridge the gaps between where all the research is, and end with a quote from Thai that says, "When we understand that our own well-being is deeply connected to the well-being of others, we can see that taking care of ourselves and taking care of society are not separate things." So thank you for your attention.
Hello. I always love talking with monastics here. It helps me stay calm, which is important because when I get excited, I talk faster. So sorry if I talk fast. Okay, so my name is Sara Lazar. I am a neuroscientist over at Massachusetts General Hospital here in Boston. And I'm going to talk today a little bit about some of our newer research. So for the past 20, 25 years, much of my research has focused on MBSR or MBCT and looking at these 8-week programs on stress, anxiety, and depression. But of course, most of us practice for more than 8 weeks, as Dave just alluded to. And we know that the benefits keep accruing, right? It doesn't stop. And there's much more to practice than just anxiety and depression and stress. But many of the studies that have looked at long-term practitioners, often you don't see a lot. Sometimes there's absolutely no difference between long-term meditators and controls on some tests. And so, but yet you talk to people and it's like, oh, this practice is life-transforming. And so the question I have long been looking for is, how to capture some of that, the good stuff that we're experiencing. And so I came across a test a couple years ago. Can we get my slides up, please? This works? Yeah. That I think starts to capture some of these changes that we see in the long-term practitioners. And so it was actually developed long ago, back actually in the 60s, in the early 70s, by a woman named Jane Levenger. She calls it ego development. We now refer to it as psychosocial development. And her hypothesis is just as physical development goes through stages, right? So there's crawling and then standing, walking, running, dancing, that the ego or the self similarly goes through these stages of development, and these stages continue throughout the entire lifespan, right? So physical development basically, stops in your, teens or 20s, versus self-development continues on and on. And what's interesting is that the early stages are very self-centric. So, think about, the teenager who, it's all about me, the world revolves around me. And there's very little understanding of other people's point of view, a lot of emotional upheaval, and just, the smallest, thing goes wrong and they're in pieces. And with each stage, what we see is that people become less and less self-centric. And so the idea of ego development is not so much that your ego is getting bigger and bigger, but actually the opposite, that your ego is maturing and developing. So you understand at each stage that it's not just about me, that my actions impact everyone around me. And so you go from being me-centric to social-centric, to world-centric, to then goes transpersonal, or transcends that and goes even beyond that, and becomes very spiritual at the latest stages. And with each stage, what's interesting is that you're going and you're becoming more and more aware of your inner life at each stage and more aspects of your inner life. But also at each stage, you become more compassionate and more altruistic, increasingly less judgmental of other people and more tolerant of differences. You understand that, okay, there's my truth, there's your truth, and there's many other truths out there, and that, my truth is not necessarily the truth, or my truth is not better than your truth. And you start to understand your mind, and so you start to see your habits of mind, and so you can start to work with them and work against them, and deconstruct them. And then also you just start to understand that, who I am is, and my experience is a construct, that, it's not what it seems to be at the surface. And so, of course, obviously, for those of you who practice and know anything about meditation, these are very much, what we hear about and we've experienced these benefits of meditation practice. And so, when I heard about this, I thought, okay, well, let's see, is this anything to do with meditation whatsoever? I had gotten funding to do a study to look at the effects of long-term meditation practice, long-term yoga practice, and controls on cognition and brain structure and function. And so we decided to add this test to see, could we see anything at all? Is there anything related to meditation with this test? And so I'm going to show you right now is the data from this study, and Omar was the first author. So as I mentioned, there's 14 long-term Vipassana practitioners. So everyone had gone on at least 1 week-long silent meditation retreat. Most of them had been on multiple long retreats. On average, they had about 8,000 hours of formal meditation practice. Then we also had 16 long-term Kripalu yoga practitioners. So Kripalu yoga is a very gentle, very mindful form of yoga. These people had about, on average, almost twice, well, more than twice, I had about 18,000 hours of practice. And actually, I need to pause and stop here. One of the reasons why we looked at yoga and meditation was when I did my first studies, people would always come up to me and say, oh, that's great that that works with mindfulness, but, I do yoga, I do Tai Chi, I do this other form of meditation, does, the brain change with those other forms of practice? We just didn't know. And of course, there's two groups of people, even within the practitioners. Some people are like, yoga, meditation, it's all the same, doesn't matter what you do. And other people are like, oh, no. They're all different, they're very, very different, and mine's the best. And so, I run into that a lot, right? And so to start to try to address that, we decided, okay, let's look and see. Can we see a difference between yoga and meditation? And then we also had 16 demographically matched controls, for gender, age, race, and education. And so we gave them this test, and what we found was that indeed, both the yoga and meditation practitioners scored higher than the controls. And what was interesting was that the meditators actually scored higher than the yoga practitioners, even though the yogis had twice as many lifetime hours of practice. Huge caveat. So one possibility here is that, okay, meditation has a bigger impact on this test than yoga practice does. But we only tested people at one time, and it's a cross-sectional study, meaning it could just be that people who score at later, more mature stages are more likely to engage in meditation. And so it may not actually have to do with the meditation practice. It could just be who the people were who we happened to recruit into the study. So that's a possibility. We have to keep that through all of this. But it is interesting because, how are yoga and meditation different? Definitely with yoga, we'd start to go inside more and understand more of what's inside. But at least in my experience, it's way more of that in meditation practice. I did yoga for several years before I started meditating, and just for me, it was a very rapid acceleration in my inner awareness when I started meditating. And again, a big part of this test is understanding the extent to which you understand your inner life. So again, we can't prove it, but it's suggestive that perhaps this is capturing something about what it is meditation does for us. Also, what we found was that the scores on this test correlated with a scale of mindfulness. So again, lots of caveats there, but it's suggestive. So next we wanted to understand what's going on in the brain. Can we understand a little bit about what's driving this? So what we did is we took data from all of the subjects and pulled it together. And we said, okay, where in the brain is correlated with this? And we were most interested in this part of the brain, which is called the posterior cingulate cortex, because this is the part of the brain that's most associated with the sense of me. And, just hundreds of studies have identified this as the part of the brain that's most related to the self-construct. And we found a very nice, strong correlation between scores on this test and this brain region. What's also really interesting is that this is also we've previously shown that in just 8 weeks of MBSR, that this is one of the brain regions that increases in gray matter structure. And gray matter structure reflects a lot of different things, but one of the things it reflects is the amount of neural connections in that region. And so we were also interested, okay, if this region is getting thicker and bigger, and that's correlated with this, who is it talking to? So we next asked the question, where in the brain is connected to this region that's related to this score? And what we found was two brain regions. One on the left is called the TPJ, which is involved in perspective taking. And this is a region that's really important for so empathy and understanding other people's point of view. But it's also perspective on not just on experience. And the other region was the dorsal medial prefrontal cortex, which is involved in comprehending narrative. So who am I? How am I relating to the world around me? So it's really interesting that these brain regions that we found were related to what we know the test is doing. And what's also interesting is that the TPJ, again, is one of these regions that we found changing in just 8 weeks. And we've also found this brain region in numerous other studies of meditation. So it does seem possible or plausible that our meditation practice is impacting these brain regions, which we know are important for this test, and that this may be some of why and how the meditation practitioners are scoring on this test at later stages than the yoga and controls. And so again, it's cross-sectional, so we need to take all this with a grain of salt. But we think that this test will start to help us understand and, importantly, quantify some of these really subtle but very powerful effects of meditation practice. And I forgot to mention, this test has also been correlated with, with compassion and wisdom and altruism, and also various measures of well-being. So it's not just a cognitive thing. It's very much related to both physical and social well-being. So thank you.
All right, thank you. What a delight to be here. How about we start with a story. Ben, who began a mindfulness program at Brown University, was driving into the first session of the program and came into the parking garage to park his car and didn't quite see the sign stating that it was valet parking. And so he drove his car upstairs and encountered a parking attendant who told him that he couldn't drive up there. And he proceeded to get into an argument with the parking attendant and then with a security guard. And this resulted in him not being allowed to enter the building. And so in anger, he put his car in reverse, stepped on the gas, and hit a pole. And as you might guess, he didn't make it to the first night of class. But we talked with him and talked to the security guards, and they allowed him in to the second week of the session. And I'll return to the story about Ben in a moment. This is a time in history where it is challenging to regulate our emotions, and it's also a physically challenging time. If we look at well-being across the adult life course, perhaps starting in young adulthood, we can explore changes in mortality rates in the United States over the last 20 plus years. And so what we've been seeing is an increase in mortality, particularly in young adults, that has been happening for years, including before COVID. And much of what is driving this increase in mortality are deaths of despair, like suicide and overdose and homicide. And what can we do about it? And in fact, how can we reverse it to foster health and happiness? We wondered if mindfulness could help. And so, for example, we conducted a systematic review where each one of these circles represents a distinct randomized controlled trial in young adults. And so, as you can see, the overwhelming amount of evidence is the impacts of mindfulness training on mental well-being. And we see pretty good evidence that mindfulness training in young adults influences anxiety symptoms, depression symptoms, and stress. But you can see major gaps in knowledge on the impacts of mindfulness training in physical health and healthy behaviors such as diet and physical activity. And so as a result, we developed the Mindfulness-Based College program, which trains young adults up in mindfulness qualities such as self-awareness and attention control, and emotion regulation, and then directs those skills towards the things that we know influence whole person health in young adults, such as their diet and their physical activity, alcohol and substance use, sleep quality, and emotion regulation. And so what we found in young adults going through this program during a college term is that they had significant improvements in a pre-registered primary outcome that was a whole person health net summary score. It was composed of things like diet and physical activity, body mass index, stress, sleep, mental health. And it outperformed the control group significantly. And so this, encouraged me to write a self-help book for young adults that is inspired by the Mindfulness-Based College program, but also inspired by the teachings of Thich Nhat Hanh. And so now if we start to shift later into the adult life course around midlife and older adulthood, the number one cause of death in the world and the United States is cardiovascular disease. So that's a pretty good place to start. And so if we think about cardiovascular disease, one of the major drivers of it is hypertension or high blood pressure. And half of American adults have high blood pressure. And of them, 75% do not have it controlled. And so we developed the mindfulness-based blood pressure reduction program that is similar to mindfulness-based college, and it trains people up in the self-regulation skills through mindfulness training of emotion regulation and attention control and self-awareness, and then directs those skills towards people's relationship with the factors that we know influence blood pressure, such as diet, physical activity, alcohol use, stress reactivity, and antihypertensive medication adherence. So if we come back to Ben, who hit the poll, as he entered this mindfulness-based blood pressure reduction program, he decided that he wanted to work on his relationship with anger and stress reactivity. And as he started to explore into the roots of that anger, he began to see that much of it was driven through excessive alcohol consumption that can influence anger, but he also saw it can influence blood pressure. And so he started to monitor in a non-judgmental way the long-term effects of his alcohol consumption, more so than just the short-term effects, as this present moment is influenced by prior moments, including what we ate and drank. And so in doing so, he began to be able to use his skills of attention control to actually act on those insights, to bring his attention towards bringing his alcohol consumption down and improving his diet. As a result, he lost 15 pounds, and his blood pressure came down such that he no longer required medication. If we look at the randomized controlled trial findings that will be coming out in the Journal of the American Heart Association in the next couple of weeks, we showed a 6-millimeter reduction in systolic blood pressure from baseline that outperformed the control group and held for 6 months follow-up. This replicated a prior single-arm trial that showed a similar reduction in systolic blood pressure that held actually for 2 years. This is a clinically relevant reduction in systolic blood pressure, or about a 5-millimeter drop, typically translates into about a 10% reduction in cardiovascular events like heart attacks and stroke. We wanted to look at the behavior mechanisms of how this might be operating, and our primary behavior outcome that we pre-registered was adherence to the dietary approaches to stop hypertension, or DASH diet. We found significant improvements in the DASH diet that outperformed the control group. We then wanted to look at the mechanisms of just how behavior change may happen, and we hypothesized and pre-registered as the primary mechanistic outcome interoceptive awareness, or in other words, self-awareness of how different foods and amounts of food can make us feel. And we found significant improvements in the multidimensional assessment of interoceptive awareness that outperformed the control group, which also replicated a prior single-arm trial. And so here we are on the day of the launch of the Thich Nhat Hanh Center for Mindfulness in Public Health at the T.H. Chan Harvard School of Public Health. It is a wonderful moment. And as the speakers were invited to come here today, we were invited to perhaps offer some reflections on opportunities for evolution of the center as it evolves. And so I bring a few different areas of expertise to this. One is that I'm director of the Mindfulness Center at the Brown University School of Public Health, which I believe is the only other mindfulness center in a school of public health in the country and possibly the world. I've also been practicing in the tradition of Thich Nhat Hanh for over 20 years, and was on a retreat with many of you here, actually just a few days ago at Blue Cliff Monastery in New York. I'm ordained in this tradition as well, so I take it very seriously. I also have experience at the Harvard School of Public Health. I worked here as a postdoctoral fellow as well as an instructor. So through those lenses, I'll offer some insights perhaps on opportunities at the intersection of mindfulness, public health, and Thich Nhat Hanh's teachings, starting first at the intersection of mindfulness and public health. And so just, one example around this, for example, is health insurance coverage that can rapidly and effectively increase access to a variety of people from various different socioeconomic backgrounds to get evidence-informed care. And so if we think about public health-informed mindfulness interventions like mindfulness-based stress reduction, that has, 1 hour, 2.5 hour a week meetings with an all-day retreat. And so should it be covered by health insurance, perhaps with its own billing code? In some countries, MBSR is reimbursed by health insurance. In the United States, it is not. And so we have an NIH grant where we're interviewing stakeholders such as policymakers, health insurers, clinicians, patients, and MBSR teachers to see what they feel is needed in order for MBSR to be covered by health insurance. We actually just completed the last interview this week. And so then we will be acting on their advice in a number of different ways, including doing the biggest systematic review and meta-analysis in history that is driven by their questions and their recommendations. If we look at the intersections of Thich Nhat Hanh's teachings in public health, Thich Nhat Hanh has developed a number of practices and programs. For example, he developed a practice called Beginning Anew, or meeting regularly with members in our community or our family where we can follow a few different steps. One is to offer true appreciation to the members in our community for what they've done. Another piece is we can offer beneficial regrets, or in other words, just apologizing for any unskillful actions that we might have taken or ways that we might have hurt them. And also, it creates a safe space for us to be able to receive feedback from our community members on how we might have been unskillful or ways we might have hurt them. And so this can sometimes nip things in the bud before they get too far along, but also promote really healthy communication in communities. To my knowledge, this program has never been researched, and is an example of opportunities for research infused by the teachings of Thich Nhat Hanh. Another example is that some leaders in the mindfulness field are encouraging us to go beyond mindfulness. So, for example, the teachings of Thich Nhat Hanh, they're embedded in a rich tradition of Buddhist history and philosophy. So if we think of maybe one of the biggest teachings in Buddhism, the Noble Eightfold Path, one of the Eightfold Paths is right mindfulness. There are 7 other paths. If we think of the Buddhist teaching around the 7 factors of awakening, the first factor is mindfulness. There are 6 other factors. And so when we consider how Thich Nhat Hanh has taught over the years in a way that is not trying to convert anyone to Buddhism, but is also respecting the historical roots while avoiding cultural appropriation, it offers many opportunities for innovation and discovery that have yet to be tapped. And so, in summary, this is the last piece I didn't quite memorize. There are many people like Ben in the world who are suffering from the ills of this moment, whether it is unhealthy diets or overconsumption of alcohol or substances or difficulties with emotion regulation. Mindfulness offers opportunities to heal these areas, and there's much work to be done, including in the areas of strength at the Harvard School of Public Health, such as in areas of nutrition, social determinants of health, policy, and methods. Thich Nhat Hanh Center in particular will provide more opportunities for the wisdom from this tradition to engage with science and education that would provide fresh insights and opportunities for discovery that would otherwise not be possible. I wish you the very best in this endeavor, and I'm pleased to help in any way that I can. So, thank you.
Hello. So pleased to be here. Just want to first show gratitude to those who brought us here to this first day of this new beginning. Lilian, Michelle, Walt, and many more who are here. Thank you. My name's Elissa Epel. I am a professor at a medical school in San Francisco, UCSF, and I have been very curious about the mind-body connection for as long as I can remember, maybe even obsessed, and that's what I've been studying over the past 30 years. I started in graduate school with Kelly Brownell, one of the scientific advisors of the new center, with the inquiry of trying to understand how stress affects what we eat, how we eat, and weight gain. And so starting off with those experimental lab studies that lasted probably about 10 years, I eventually went to the question of, okay, we really know a lot about how important our emotional state is for determining our nutritional state and what happens in the body. How can we reverse engineer this? How can we do interventions that help people go from mindless, compulsive eating of food that we might not even call food the highly ultra-processed, highly palatable food, to a mindfulness that can respect the body, the mind, the planet. And so, of course, we turn to really the strongest medicine that we have, the miracle of our kind attention as a guide. And have, so I'm just so delighted to tell you what we found. So I'm going to first tell you things that we feel we know, that we've established through multiple studies, ours and others, about understanding the stress response and nutrition and metabolism. And then I'll tell you briefly about 2 clinical trials that we have done using mindfulness for understanding metabolic health and improving metabolic health, looking at both dietary sugar and the sugar in our blood, glucose. And what happens when we apply this during pregnancy, a very critical period for 2 generations. And then lastly, planting some seeds for our discussion about how do we apply this fundamental wisdom to public health, to moving the bell curve. Stress eating is extremely common. Around 1/3 of our population uses it as the lowest hanging fruit, but we don't grab fruit, right? We grab highly ultra-processed food. And during the pandemic, of course, stress eating went up, weight gain and eating disorders became more rampant, and we're still seeing the fallout. And this, the first and only book of its kind, Savor, by our own Dr. Lilian Cheung and Thai, has been a real guide. And you will see that the thread of using not just mindfulness, but mindfulness applied to the intention of choosing wisely and choosing sustainably has led to a almost 20-year program of research. Thank you, Lilian. So what do we know about how stress impacts eating and metabolism? We choose the rainbow under stress, but it's the fake, false processed rainbow. Ouch. We don't choose carrots. So stress impacts what we eat, how we metabolize food, and where it's stored. It shapes our cravings, the strongest drive we have, the impulsivity and the compulsivity of mindless eating. So stress is one of the important first pathways to the type of eating that drives disease. It creates a biological response we know well from animal studies, tremendous angiogenesis, blood flow to the intra-abdominal fat cells, blowing up our adipocytes and creating inflammation, creating the adipocyte as a machine that now releases inflammation into our blood, pro-aging. So abdominal fat is an incredibly easy to assess, important phenotypic marker of the metabolic syndrome, of pre-disease, of diabetes, and every disease we know, really cancer and heart disease as well. So stress eating is a very important target. We have applied mindfulness and the intention to use mindfulness while eating in interventions. And so before I go into that, why don't we all take a conscious breath together, just appreciating being like-minded beings in this room together. So breathing in slowly and fully and releasing. Based on MBSR and mindfulness-based eating awareness training by Jean Christeller, we have used mindfulness training in many clinical trials now to both create a reduction in the stress arousal systems, cortisol. Cortisol is one of the players that remodels fat toward the abdomen, and to reduce neuropeptide Y, a hunger peptide, and to reduce the emotional and compulsive eating. And our outcomes have always been abdominal fat, not general BMI, which is very multiply determined, but rather the stress pathway, and glucose control, underlying weight, the more important metabolic health parameter. And we've really targeted some of these mindful, the changes that come with the practice, such as interoceptive awareness of hunger and fullness, emotional triggers, eating because of feeling bored, sad, angry, rather than because of true hunger, and then helping with the cravings. Stress increases cravings, and we can use mindfulness to be with cravings, to ride through cravings. And so one of the clinical trials we did compared with 200 people, overweight or obese, compared typical weight loss to mindful weight loss. We found that both groups lost weight, but not in the same way. The mindfulness group was different. They maintained their weight loss a bit more, but really the big difference was in their blood glucose. They had decreased blood glucose 12 and 18 months later. What were the mechanisms for these changes? One was the decreased compulsive eating, and the other was the practice of using mindful check-ins right before eating, a very active ingredient. On a 1 through 10 scale, how hungry do you feel? How full do you feel? And maybe even doing that check-in twice in the middle of eating. So they ate less sugar. The more mindful practice, the less sweets, snacking, and sugar intake. What happened inside their cells? This is unpublished data. We had such generous volunteers. They let us collect their abdominal fat cells. So a small group of them, we looked at the inflammation, and what we found was that the mindful group had a reduction in their amount of inflammation their fat cells were creating. And this was associated with stress and depression. So just at baseline, we see a correlation. Our mind states of stress, arousal, and distress are directly correlated to the amount of inflammation in our fat cells, and we reverse engineer this. The reductions in stress and depression were related to reductions in the inflammatory response in the cells. Okay, let me tell you about our next trial. We applied this to pregnancy, such a critical period, so much caring and motivation in pregnant moms. And so we trained overweight or obese women, 200 again. Half of them had the mindful intervention and half had treatment as usual. Very simple training. Nutrition, the plate method, Lilian, mindful eating, movement, move my body, and breathe. And focus that on the baby too. Send metta and loving kindness to yourself, to your baby, hold your belly, to everyone in the room, to the world. So there was a beautiful metta practice every day. We found in this intervention that we were able to change the glucose in their blood and their glucose tolerance. We reduced by half the number of women who developed impaired glucose tolerance. We also found improvements in the offspring, reduced infant illness and visits in the first year of life, and an improved nervous system, reactivity to stress. Our most dramatic finding was that we didn't just improve stress and depression immediately afterward, but 8 years later, one of the longest effects of a mindfulness intervention that we know. Let me jump to telling you that we have been so upset about liquid sugar, and in our own medical school, feeding liquid sugar, soda, to our patients, to our staff, to all of us. And Cindy Liang, who is here, has first shown that liquid sugar is associated with telomere shortening. I had to mention telomeres. Accelerated biological aging in several studies now. We removed it from our campus. We found it improved intra-abdominal fat. We are now doing this in 15 hospital systems in a controlled study. But it didn't work for everyone. People with compulsive eating, cravings, didn't change their sugar intake. What did we use for that? Mindfulness training, motivational training and awareness of emotional triggers of eating. So results will come from that soon. We found environmental co-benefits of the getting rid of the toxic drinks in our whole system, reduction of 2% in carbon output. So we're now trying to scale up our mindful pregnancy program. We're now testing what happens when we reduce toxic substances in our environments, because mindfulness itself is not going to work. Part of the public health model is understanding how we work under naturalistic conditions, which is stress, which is rushing. So we need to be changing the food environment. So emotional states shape metabolic states and health. We know that mindfulness can help at an individual level. It can help with binge eating, stress eating, and glucose control, and not weight, just so you know. The consistent finding across our lab and others is don't be looking at the scale for your success, but look deeper at insulin sensitivity. So the real question is, how do we scale this up? What are the public health implications? Redesigning our environments, the food availability, are going to be so important, in addition to the social, cultural changes that we can make. So I think of compassionate policy. What is compassionate public policy? Not just looking at safety, but promoting an environment that, instead of increasing stress, it increases the social fabric of care, the safety nets. So one example is what happened when we took away these sugared beverages. People were grateful. They became aware that the food was, the drinks were gone because of both the awareness of sugar and what it does to the liver, but also because we care about their health. So I will just end with, I look forward to discussions today and onward about how we extend this to a public health model. The climate and the environmental crisis will help us transform, because we have no other choice. We have to. Thank you.
Well, I'm sure everyone here learned a lot and also gained inspiration from the fantastic presentations by the panel. So thank you very much. That was really spectacular. Perhaps not too surprisingly, we are running a little bit behind schedule. So we're actually going to put off our formal discussion. Now, we will later in the day have a discussion that will include all the presentations. But so we'll have a break now. We do want to be back at 11:10. Of course, you can continue informal discussions during the break, during the lunchtime, and I think the weather's going to be enough for a meditative walking during the lunch break. So thank you again.